Hi there, my name is Tyrone Thacker. I'm a First Nations man. I grew up in Lacombe-Panoka area. My ancestors are from the Saw Ridge Band up in Slave Lake. I'm working in the agriculture industry, providing on-farm services to various types of farmers around central Alberta. This has given me the opportunity to be exposed to new and innovative farming techniques that I would like to bring to you. On this show, each episode will feature a visit to one of these farms. We will visit Verge Permaculture. Permaculture is a relatively new agriculture practice focused on creating sustainable circular systems that will produce food for centuries. Farm 253 is another permaculture farm in the early stages of its design, being developed by Travis and Deanna Thiessen. They are focused on growing and raising their own food without synthetic fertilizers and chemicals, using traditional holistic methods. Perpelkin Farms is a mixed grain farm and cow-calf operation that focuses on growing all their own cattle feed. They are also part of a trial research program incorporating AI to help improve the quality of life of their cows during calving season. Steel Pony Farm is a high-output mixed vegetable farm that uses a subscription box program to feed their local population. They primarily harvest their produce by hand and pursue sustainability by utilizing local sources of compost to maintain soil health and productivity rather than synthetic fertilizers. Good Morning Honey is a large-scale honey operation in Alberta, focused on harvesting unpasteurized pure honey. Their operation involves thousands of hives, providing honey to markets in North America, Asia, and Europe. In each episode, we will learn what makes each farm unique and their long-term goals for sustainability. In this day and age, what's important to me is knowing where my food came from, how healthy it is, what my food is eating, and most of all, how it's being treated. The goal of this show is to highlight some of the innovative work that progressive farmers are pioneering in Alberta to develop long-term sustainability of local food sources. Today, we're at Verge Permaculture.
Hello, welcome to this episode. We're out in northwestern central Alberta range. We are at Verge Permaculture, which is a permaculture farm in that area, and we're going to learn a lot about permaculture. So permaculture was something that I was super interested in. It's one of those words that I've heard for a long time, didn't know anything about it. Was lucky enough to run across a gentleman named Rob Avis, who is a very knowledgeable permaculture artist or permaculturist. So yeah, Rob is gonna teach us everything he knows about permaculture. So Rob, could you briefly outline your kind of life story in a few key beats before you discovered permaculture and before you decided to make that strong change in that direction?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, my dad ran multiple industrial food plants right across Canada. We had the largest cinnamon bun company, we had the largest croissant company, we had the largest cheesecake company at one point. And so I grew up in industrial food. I grew up watching these cakes that we were producing run through kilometers of pipe before getting deposited and baked off. And then after finishing high school, I went to university, became a mechanical engineer, and ended up meeting my wife, Michelle, and she had done most of her work up until that point in the oil and gas industry and was working in Calgary. And so I followed her there and ended up becoming an oil and gas engineer, designing facilities and pipelines, bringing natural gas and oil to market, essentially. And one day I was getting ready to cut down a massive swath of forest. And serendipity struck, as it usually does, and I ended up getting an email from a friend that had a small YouTube video. YouTube had just come out. It was pretty fresh still. And the video was called Greening the Desert. It was about 3 minutes long. And it showed this gentleman working in the Dead Sea Valley, lowest place on earth, hypersaline soils, hyper desertified, doing some very simple earthworks on a, I don't know, 15 or 20 acre scale, and completely regenerating this piece of land. And I said, oh my gosh, like I'm getting ready to cut this forest down, and this guy's putting all of his life energy into making the world a better place. I'm, at the very least, maintaining status quo. And so I took out my calculator and I said, you know, if I live 80 to 90 years, that's roughly 600,000 hours of life energy. What do I want to spend the next 2/3 of my life at that point doing? Do I want to maintain status quo, or do I actually want to push the needle somewhere and do something a little bit different? So I called my wife up, said we had to quit our jobs, and we did. We quit our jobs. We traveled around the world. We went to Denmark for 6 months learning about renewable energy. Everybody in the oil and gas industry said, you know, you can't transition the world off of fossil fuel. We're going to be using this forever. Yet the stuff that I was reading was like, well, fossil fuels are probably going to come to an end at some point. It's a finite resource. Who knows when? Doesn't really matter when. And so we ended up going to Denmark, studying renewable energy, realized that we could repower the world. They were already doing it. They were 20% of the way there. Today, which is many years later, they're close to 100% renewable in multiple domains. We ended up traveling right through Europe. We fixed a Volkswagen van, and then we converted it to run on vegetable oil. And then we drove right through Canada, the US, and Mexico, knowing that we could repower the world. We wanted to see if we could feed the world using different techniques, because we started learning about industrial food. I had come from industrial food, but I didn't realize what was involved in industrial agriculture. And so we started traveling to different farms right across North America. Ended up bumping into this thing called permaculture again, which is how it all started. Decided to take a permaculture design course. After taking it, completely changed my life. And I looked at my wife and I said, I'm going to teach this. And she says, you're crazy. You don't know anything about biology. You don't know anything about gardening. Like, how are you going to teach permaculture? I said, I'm going to do it. So I then went on to go to Australia, and I spent 6 months there studying under the guy that originally got me to quit my job, and learning everything that I could from him before coming back to Canada and starting Verge Permaculture.
That video that you watched, what about it inspired you so much that you were like, I am gonna completely change my life course, my life direction here?
So I didn't have the words to explain it at that point. But when I was a child, I remember, I can't remember what age I was, maybe 7 or 8. I was at the Vancouver Zoo, and I was watching a video, kind of like a David Attenborough type video, where they were talking about how rapidly the Amazon rainforest was getting cut down. And I remember being just gut punched by it. It was just, it really struck me so much so that I can remember it to this day. Like, I can remember the room that I was in and the video I was watching. And so the feeling that I felt from that age up until when I was working in the oil and gas industry, up until I took a permaculture design course actually, was one that we all feel right now when you read Facebook, when you read the newspaper, when you listen to pretty much any kind of news program. It's this sensation that we all feel, but we don't want to put words to it, or we don't know how to put words to it, which is that humans are inherently destructive. You have to look really hard in conventional media to actually find good news stories. And then seeing that video with Jeff Lawton, I realized that no, actually humans can be just as positive as we are negative. It's just that nobody's telling those stories. And so when I found a permaculture design course and I started understanding how we could use all this life energy, all of these massive big earth machines, how we could use conventional tools that we would find in conventional agriculture and just repurpose them just slightly to change the balance a little bit, to change how we interact with our ecosystems, we could be just as positive as we are negative. So we just have to change our relationship with the ecosystems that we live amongst. I first took a permaculture design course in 2007, and after taking that course, it changed my life because I realized that I could actually apply my life energy in a really creative and positive way. And I no longer felt this impending sense of doom that humans were only able to destroy. We actually have the ability to create. We actually have the ability to make things better than we did before. And that was just a huge sack of potatoes that I didn't have to carry anymore. I was all of a sudden able to be, I think that before the permaculture design course, I was dealing with eco-depression, actually. Like I was really mourning all of the destruction, and I didn't really have any way to, I didn't have any good stories to reinforce the other way of thinking until I took a permaculture design course. So agriculture has been around for many thousands of years, and lots of people will debate when it officially started. And it's taken us a long time to get here. And I think we need to be really grateful to our farmers. I think that without conventional agriculture, we'd all starve to death. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. The hope is that by kind of looking into what currently is done and what works and what doesn't work, we can actually iterate and improve, which is something that humans have been doing for thousands of years. But I think that the amount of opportunity to transform that system into one that allows humans to coexist on this planet for the next 10,000 years makes me really optimistic. And there are some incredible farmers out there that are doing really innovative things that allow them to produce huge amounts of food while enhancing the ecosystem around them. And that type of farming is called regenerative agriculture.
Could you define permaculture and then go through a list of whatever guiding principles it has or guiding compasses it has in its decision-making process?
So one of the prime directives of permaculture is kind of twofold. One is to get your house and garden in order so that it shelters and feeds you, and take responsibility for your life and that of your children. This really spoke very strongly to me when I first took my permaculture design course, because so much of the narrative that exists right now in the world is blaming our problems on other people. You know, it's like fracking companies are bad because they're fracking to get oil out. Well, okay, but are you using that oil? Are you driving a car? Are you heating your house with natural gas? Don't go and blame people for things that you're contributing to. What can you do? What do you have the ability with your life energy to actually transform? Stop blaming your problems on other people and being a victim. So the first thing that you do when you start going down this journey is you say, well, what resources do I have? Whether it's money, energy, life energy, material resources, community resources, and how can I get all of those things aligned with the core ethic of permaculture, which we'll talk about secondly, as opposed to blaming other people for stuff. And then take responsibility for yourself, but also for your children. So how are you going to raise your kids? The second thing that permaculture espouses is a core ethic. And so when Bill Mollison was writing the Permaculture Design Manual, he started researching indigenous communities all around the world, like far into the past, and started trying to understand what made some indigenous communities really successful and able to live for very, very long periods of time, like hundreds of thousands of years. Like the Aborigines of Australia, for example, have been in Australia for up to 100,000 years. Some people say it's even longer than that. Versus other indigenous communities that didn't have the kind of tenure that those did. And the ones that lasted really long periods of time all had three basic ethics, which was care of earth, so take care of the garden that you live within, and it will take care of you, so care of earth. Care of people, so we have to take care of ourselves. And so if you think about the environmental movement is very much about taking care of the earth, but it tends to, again, that's the narrative of like humans being inherently destructive comes from the environmental movement. And so it's like humans are just a plague on the planet. Permaculture actually is a very humanist movement because we see humans as the solution, not as the problem. And the third one is future care. And so how do I have to act today in order to make sure that there's a positive future for my kids and for their kids, and not just for my family, but for all children that I have influence over. And that's sometimes referred to in indigenous culture as 7 generations thinking. So how do I think 7 generations into the future, and how do the actions that I take today affect those 7 generations? So that's the core ethic of permaculture. The last one that speaks to me really strongly is this, is 2 words that Mollison coined, which is everything gardens. When I first read that, I didn't really know what Mollison meant, but basically what he's saying there is that all animals on Earth garden. All animals manipulate their ecosystem to their benefit. So beavers cut down trees and build dams. They're manipulating their environment to create a space that is better for them. And as a result of doing that, it's better for other species as well. So the pine beetle crisis that happened in northern BC, part of that was planting monocrops of pine. But the other piece that happened was the woodpecker started actually farming the pine beetle. So they were actually taking pine beetles from one tree and moving them to another because they eat the pine beetle. So they were gardening pine beetles. The Arctic fox urinates around its den, which creates a habitat for certain types of plants, which actually attract in the food that they like to eat. And so every species, when you dig into it enough, actually gardens their ecosystem. They create disturbance in order to improve the situation for themselves. And so the underlying message here is that if a beaver has the right to manipulate its ecosystem, so do humans. And so we have the right to manipulate things, but the metric of success should be, is it improving things for myself, but also for the life around me? And so humans can do the exact same thing. We can grow gardens, we can grow orchards and food forests, we can collect energy, and if we do it in the right way, we can actually create space for all the other living organisms that surround us. And in fact, we don't do that because we feel sorry for them. That's a really interesting, that's like an environmentalist type approach. We do it because we know that having the birds and the squirrels and the beavers and the foxes and the coyotes and all of these animals coexisting with us actually benefits us. So we're actually very self-interested in that regard. We're not coming at this from an environmental paradigm. We're coming at it from a paradigm of self-interest. We're self-interested in enhancing the ecosystem because an enhanced ecosystem is going to produce better food. Permaculture is the conscious design of regenerative human habitat. Now that's a lot of words and it could be a little bit jargony, so let's break it down a little bit. Well, what is human habitat? Well, human habitat can be a lot of different things, but in the 21st century, our civilization is built upon underground infrastructure. It's built upon trucks moving food around. It's built upon electrical grids. It's built upon natural gas grids. It's built with having our homes. We have farms that provide us that food. And so habitat are all these different components that allow us to exist on this planet right now. The thing is that there's very few regenerative systems that allow us to meet all of our needs without destroying the ecosystems around us. So nature is able to operate in a regenerative system that's clean, green, and sustainable, and it doesn't destroy itself. And it's been doing it for 4 billion years. There have been a few hiccups along the way with mass extinctions with asteroids and things like that. But overall, it's been a incredibly productive and regenerative system. Every calorie of food that we produce right now in the conventional agricultural system needs 20 to 30 calories of hydrocarbon in. So if we were coyotes running around chasing our food, and we had to spend 20 to 30 calories of our fat, our stored calories, to get 1 calorie of rabbit, we'd all starve to death. So our industrial food system is really energy intensive. So everything that we do uses resources in a way that is non-circular. So we use it once and then we dispose of it. So we use natural gas to heat our homes and we dispose of the CO2. The food that we consume comes off of a farmer's field, and then we eat it and we defecate it, and those nutrients will never go back to that farmer's field. So there's no circularity. So if you think about all the things that we need to create our habitat in the 21st century, they're single use, and we end up creating huge unfunded liabilities on the back end of them that are basically degrading our ability to continue to live on this planet. So permaculture aims to reverse that. So when I eat out of this garden, I'm going to consume it on this property. All of the compost that gets generated goes right back onto this property. We can even use systems to actually turn our wastewater back into resources that can be used back on this farm to feed orchards or to feed other parts of the property. Maybe not food, but we can at least circulate those nutrients on property. On our property, we have solar power, and so we're trying to actually supply all of the energy that we require to heat our home and to power our home. Okay, welcome to our farm. My name is Rob Avis. We're in central Alberta, and today I'm gonna take you on a tour of our farm, which is very much under construction. Now, everybody loves to see videos of farms that are completely finished, but it's kind of a rare opportunity to kind of see how the bones get put together on a system like this. And so as we walk around the farm, we're gonna see some rough stuff because building out a property like this literally takes many, many years. So when you're looking at a passive solar greenhouse, there's a few things that distinguish it from other greenhouses. So number one, you'll notice that there's only one glazing surface. So glazing is another word for glass. In this case, we're not using glass, we're using polycarbonate, which is a plastic. And so this surface allows the sunlight to come in, which is what allows the greenhouse to produce plants. Plants need light. We only have one glazing surface on here because we live in a very cold climate that gets a lot of sun. And so the west, east, and north walls are insulated, which minimize the amount of thermal energy that leaves the greenhouse. And the south surface is glazed to allow that sunlight in. And because the other walls are insulated, the greenhouse is able to maintain a good temperature for 3 seasons of the year without any additional thermal energy. In some climates, these greenhouses will actually operate year-round without the addition of any fossil fuels. Now you'll notice that on the south, we've got vents that are open right now. We've also got vents on the north side. We've got 2 doors, one on the east and one on the west. And we've got a garage door, and we'll talk about how all of these different elements operate automatically in order to optimize the internal growing conditions inside of the greenhouse. Let's go inside now and take a look at all these independent systems and how they operate to make a 3-season and sometimes even a 4-season garden that allows you to grow things like avocado, bananas, figs, olives, feijoa, and any type of crop that you can imagine that grows pretty much anywhere on earth could technically be transported into a system like this to grow year-round food. So one of the things that makes a passive solar greenhouse unique is something called the climate battery. And so this duct right here is designed to harvest hot air from the greenhouse. So when the greenhouse gets hot enough, this fan right here turns on and it sucks air out of this duct and ultimately from behind this solar thermal air collector, which is the black wall just to my left right here. So that air gets pulled out of the wall, it gets pumped underground into a manifold and pushed underground to an outlet on the other side, kitty corner to me right now. And that thermal energy gets stored in the ground all summer long and then is released in the wintertime, which allows the greenhouse to stay above freezing no matter what time of year it is, even in the middle of winter. So this device right here not only stores energy in the summer, but releases it in the winter time. So to go in a little bit more detail, this 12-inch duct goes down into this 12-inch PVC pipe, which then has an elbow at the bottom, and it moves right across the greenhouse on the east side of the greenhouse. It's then connected into 34 4-inch weeping tiles, which then run the entire length of the greenhouse. Now these weeping tiles are also sometimes called Big O pipe. They're corrugated polyethylene pipe that has perforations in it that allow the air to move underground. So the air could come in here at, let's say, 40 degrees Celsius, and as it moves through these pipes, the thermal energy is transferred to the soil, heating the soil up. And as it moves through the greenhouse, cools down, and by the time it gets to the other manifold on the other side of the greenhouse, the air is cool and the ground is starting to warm up. And so the other name for this system is actually subterranean heating and cooling system. So while the hot air is moving its energy into the soil, the cool air that comes out on the other side is actually cooling the greenhouse down. So it's providing both a heating element, storing that energy for winter, and a cooling element by cooling the air down and keeping the plants cool through the summertime. So by the end of the summertime, the soil in here is going to be about 30 degrees Celsius. Any warmer than that, and you're going to start causing damage to the plants. Now that thermal energy will slowly get released as we go into the fall and into the winter time. And to give you an idea how much energy is stored within the soil, This greenhouse will stay above zero till about the beginning to middle of January most years, just because of the amount of thermal energy that we have stored in the soil. Now, that's staying above freezing without any additional fossil fuels, because we've stored so much energy in the soil with a fan that consumes as little as about 100 watts of energy. So very, very little energy used to move that energy in order to get an incredible thermal benefit right into the winter. Now, if I use a little bit of fossil fuel, I can actually keep this greenhouse above freezing right through the winter time, which would allow me to grow grapes, bananas, figs, avocado, citrus, you name it, we could grow it inside of this greenhouse. So in the summertime, the soils in here can get up to 30 degrees Celsius just because the system is heating them up. And to compare that to what soils might be outside of the greenhouse, we might get a soil surface temperature of about 10 or 12 degrees Celsius. So quite a big difference in soil temperature. And we don't want to push that too much, because if it gets too warm, the plants actually don't like it very much. In the winter time, the soils in here could still be 10, 15, 20 degrees Celsius, and we might have frozen soils 6 feet down just outside of the greenhouse. And so this system is storing so much energy that it allows our soils to stay at a much higher temperature even in the wintertime. This garage door also acts as a really important ventilation system. If we don't ventilate it properly, this greenhouse can easily go to 60 or 70 degrees Celsius very quickly, because we have so much solar energy coming into the building. To compensate for that, we have southern vents, and we also have vents really high up that are difficult to see, and those will open as soon as the greenhouse gets to 20 degrees Celsius. And they do a great job of bringing that temperature down. But in the extremes of summer, when we can get 30, 35 degrees Celsius and extremely hot sun that is directly overhead, even those vents won't keep up. And so we have to open up our east and west doors. But we've also figured out how to automate the garage door to open and close based upon internal greenhouse temperature. The greenhouse itself measures temperature, and so if the temperature exceeds 30 degrees Celsius, then it will switch the garage door and have it open up. The garage door will stay open as long as the temperature exceeds that 30 degrees Celsius, or it also operates on a timer, and so once it gets to about 8:30 p.m. every night, the garage door will actually close down automatically to make sure that no deer come in here and eat all of our food. Every year we run some experiments, and so this is an experiment that it isn't really doing very much, but this is a watermelon plant. Some years they do better than others, so I'm not sure why that didn't take off this year. We've got a tomato right behind him, sweet potatoes right here, cucumbers, some more sweet potatoes. We grow a lot of tomatoes in this greenhouse, and so if you look at the row behind me, we've got an entire row of tomatoes, and they're just going off right now. It's tough at this time of the year to actually keep up with all the tomatoes that are producing. We've got alpine strawberries, we've got a Chinese melon, which is pretty cool, and so these are really, really tasty when they get ripe. A friend of mine who runs another passive solar greenhouse in Olds, Alberta gave me these seeds, which is pretty sweet. We've got peppers, both hot and sweet. So we've got beautiful cherry tomatoes right here. We've got some Mizuna, which is a really nice salad green. English cucumbers, love those. We've been eating these all summer long off of this plant. And so every year this greenhouse looks a little different because we choose different crops to grow in here, and it's like a garden. Some years it just is uncontrollable, and other years it's a little bit less productive. It really depends upon how much rain we've got, how much sun we end up getting. And also this year is a pretty special year because we are undergoing a huge deep energy retrofit on our house, and so we've had a little bit less attention in the greenhouse and more attention on the construction project that we're going to talk about next. One thing that people get confused about regarding permaculture is that it's like organic gardening on steroids, or it's just about growing food. And while food is an important component to permaculture, it's definitely just one out of many components. And so when we bought this property, we ended up with this 1990s home that was super leaky. And so this year we took the opportunity to retrofit the house. And so to kind of give you a sense of what we've done here, I know it looks pretty rough right now on the outside, but there's an incredible amount of detail that has gone into the construction of this wall system. Now, we did an air blower test on this house to understand how much energy it actually consumed on an annual basis. And it turned out that the house was so leaky. In fact, there were 8 air changes an hour, which meaning that we had to heat the air up 8 times per hour in order to keep it at a livable temperature in the middle of winter. So that's a lot of energy that is just leaking out to the environment. So what we did here is we took that 2x6 wall that I just described, we added a new Tyvek layer to the outside, and we taped it all back to the wall. Now, Tyvek allows moisture to move through, but it doesn't allow air to move through the wall. We then built out a 10-inch wall system on the outside of the wall, which is why these window bucks look as deep as they are. And so by adding 10 inches out this way, we added R40 to the wall system. So now we're dealing with an R60 wall system instead of an R21. There's a lot of tape on here. Anywhere there's a nail hole or anywhere there's a seam in the actual vapor membrane has been taped. So we should be able to get the air changes through the wall system almost to zero. The house will still have a bit of an air leakage because it's an old house, but wherever we've done a really good job with these details, the air movement should be very, very low. So the insulation in the wall is cellulose, which is a recycled paper product, and it gets blown in at a really high pressure. And so this is why you kind of see a little bit of the pillowing happening right here. But what's really nice about cellulose is that it'll actually conform to every nook and cranny in the wall. And so we get really good insulation coverage, which is what gives us such a great insulation value inside the house. Now, the next thing that we're gonna do on the house is we're actually gonna take the entire roof system off, and we're gonna add another 10 inches of insulation onto the roof and do all the same air sealing details that we've done here, but up there. If we do our job right, this house will never go below zero, even at -40. And what used to take us 12 cords of wood and an enormous amount of propane will now be able to be heated literally with almost nothing. Almost the heat off of our bodies, our cooking, and a small amount of additional energy will keep this house perfectly at 20 degrees Celsius with almost no energy input. So if you think about what we're doing on the property, everything has to do with energy. The food that we grow gives energy to our bodies. Eventually we'll have dairy and we'll have meat on the farm as well that's also generating energy. And really all those plants and animals are doing is they're harvesting solar energy in the form of plants. The house project is all about energy as well, because we're trying to maintain a certain temperature inside. We're trying to live in a home that uses very little energy, which saves us money. It's more comfortable and it's better for the environment. But in addition, we have to also generate some energy in order to power the lights, to run fans in there, to be able to cook. And so let's talk a little bit about how we generate energy or electricity on the property in order to power the home. So this is actually a fairly small solar array. It's the first of 2 or 3 that are going to be on our property. It's about 6 kilowatts. It doesn't meet all of our power needs, and it is grid tied, meaning that as the energy is generated, it goes to the meter and is sent back into the grid, and we get paid for that power. This solar array is constructed on top of an articulating ground mount system, which allows us to change the angle of the solar panel for different times of the year. So in the winter time, the array will be quite steep, which allows the snow to shed off of it. And also the sun is lower in the sky, and so we're able to collect more energy, about 15% more, by having it at an optimized angle. And then when the sun is really high in the sky in the summertime, we can have it in this position, which is quite flat because the sun is right overhead, and you typically want to have your sun perpendicular to the surface that you're collecting on. And in the spring, it's somewhere in the middle between the wintertime and the summertime. And so this array gets moved 3 times a year in order to optimize the amount of solar generation that we're getting. So there's a variety of myths that exist with solar that we should probably just debunk right now. Solar is now the cheapest energy form on planet Earth. It's cheaper than nuclear, it's cheaper than coal, it's cheaper than natural gas. And I think it's competing right now for wind, but eventually solar will be the cheapest energy source on planet Earth. What's great about solar is there's no moving parts. So you don't have to get in there and make any repairs to it because there's nothing actually moving in there like a car engine. Another myth that exists within solar is that it's not recyclable. And so at the end of life, it creates this huge problem. And a little while ago, that was true, but they've now figured out how to fully recycle these solar panels. Another myth that exists is, what happens to these panels when you end up with a big hailstorm. And I don't know the exact specifications, but every solar panel has to have a resilience number as it pertains to hail coming out of the sky. And for sure, these panels can take up to a loonie or a toonie size, so like almost a golf ball in diameter. I've definitely seen solar panels kind of withstand that in Calgary, which is one of the largest hail belts in the world. These panels will actually pay for themselves in as little as 6 years, and they will continue to generate electricity at about 90% output for at least 25 years, and they'll continue to put out electricity for up to 50 years, even at a slightly lower output of, let's say, 80%. And so I think solar is a fantastic investment for all the reasons we just mentioned. And within the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see an absolute proliferation of solar globally, and it will become the predominant energy source on planet Earth because it doesn't require fuel, it has no moving parts, and it saves you tons and tons of money over the lifespan of the actual solar panel. Awesome, so I've mentioned that we're in construction, we're getting ready to put in our food forest, so let's go look at our hardest workers on the farm, which are the chickens, and they're actively working on making the garden bed ready for planting of the food forest next spring. These chickens are the hardest workers on the farm, and they are doing an incredible amount of pre-work for us before we come in and plant these systems out to whatever they're going to be planted in. So this might look like a kind of grassy or weedy area that the chickens are hanging out in, but this is actually the future location of one of our 3 food forests that we're going to put onto our property. Now, a food forest is a system that generates food without having to plant it every single year. And so, like I said earlier, I go into the forest, I go into the natural zones of our property to get inspiration. And because we have a lot of forest here, when we plant this to our food forest, we're going to mimic what's going on in our forests further afield. And so a food forest typically has 7 layers. It has a canopy, it has a mid-story, an understory, a shrub layer, a vine layer, a root layer, and some might even say a fungal layer. And so all of those things that come out of a food forest are generally either edible by us or by our animals. And unlike an annual garden, this garden never has to be planted again. So we want to do a lot of work to prepare the soils here to make sure that when we do come in and plant this food forest, it's going to take off. There's an old adage that the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago, and the next best time to plant it is today. But we actually believe the best time to plant a tree is when the soils are ready. So these chickens are always one step ahead of us. And one of the reasons we have this chicken tractor right here is so that we can actually move our chickens around the farm from spring until fall and have them prepare any of the garden beds or perennial beds or food forest beds prior to us wanting to work in them. Chickens are absolutely incredible little animals. They have incredible vision, just like hawks, and they can see things that our eyes cannot pick up. And so if you watch them for long enough, you'll notice that they're scratching the ground, removing some of the duff, and then they look down and they start pecking there. And that's because they can see insects that we can't even see. And so when you're providing them with fresh pasture on a regular basis, they're literally going through and combing through it, trying to find those protein hits in order to make those eggs better, to make them healthier. And also it's preparing the soil for our future food forest here, or any of the garden systems that we want to grow on our property. So the act of scratching and disturbing the soil does a couple of things. One, chickens can be really great at pest reduction. So because they can see bugs that we can't see, if there are pests in the soil that could attack apples, like codling moth, for example, or white butterfly larvae, things like that, the chickens will actually scratch through the soil and they'll eat them, so they can reduce the pest pressure that you might have when you're growing in these systems. So even once the food forest is here, we'll bring the chickens back in to help manage those pest cycles. The second thing that they do is they disturb the soil, and by disturbing it just lightly, it will help to release some nitrogen, and so you end up getting a natural benefit from that scratching action. And then lastly, they manure it, and so by pooping all over this little place, chicken manure is very hot. It's got a lot of nutrients in it, a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, plus micronutrients. And so that will actually prime the soil and help to improve the nutrient cycle. So in a couple of weeks, when our garden has been harvested, we'll move all of these chickens over to the garden, and they'll eat whatever vegetables, bugs, and vegetation they can find, and they'll manure the garden before we put it to bed, preparing it for next season's garden. And by doing that, we're always adding additional fertility. There's this common misconception in the world right now that you can actually run a veganic garden, meaning that we run gardens that don't require animal input. But when we don't have animals, we actually have to put the fertility back into the soil using synthetic fertilizers. And so I don't actually agree with that philosophy. I think to have a fully regenerative system, you need to have the benefit of having livestock, large and small, to provide the manure, the disturbance patterns, and the fertility back into the system to have a really productive system. These chickens not only provide us with fertility, with the labor to tear up grass like you can see around here, but they also give us eggs. And so eggs are one of the most nutrient-dense, inexpensive foods that we can eat as humans. The more diverse land that we give to these chickens, the more area, the more green feed, the more bugs they're able to eat, the more nutrient-dense those eggs are. So we get so many benefits out of these chickens. I think every property, whether they're in development or just in maintenance, should have a chicken flock, because they literally are the hardest working laborers on the farm, and they're absolutely hilarious to watch too.